Let's talk about a piece of the Constitution that gives you a fundamental power, the 17th Amendment. It's the reason you get to walk into a voting booth and choose your U.S. senators. Simple enough, right? But what if I told you that giving people that power might have been a huge mistake? Was it a massive win for democracy, or did it accidentally break a key part of America's original design? Let's dive in. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But this is a real debate happening right now in American politics. You have prominent people arguing that repealing the 17th Amendment, taking away your direct vote for senators, would actually fix our broken system. To even begin to understand why anyone would suggest that, we've got to rewind and look at the original blueprint. So, let's go back to the beginning. Why was the system set up so that you didn't vote for your senators? I mean, what were they thinking? Well, the answer gets right to the heart of what the framers were trying to build. The framers were absolutely obsessed with preventing tyranny. We all learn about the horizontal checks and balances, right? The president, Congress, and the courts all keeping each other in line. But they also built in a vertical check, this constant power struggle, a tug of war between the federal government in Washington and the individual state governments. And that principle has a name: federalism. During the Constitutional Convention, one of the delegates used this really cool analogy to explain it. He said to think of the federal government as the sun and the states as the planets. Each planet has its own authority, its own gravitational pull, keeping the whole system in a perfect, delicate balance. So what was the Senate in this analogy? The Senate was supposed to be the force that kept the states firmly in their orbits, making sure the federal sun didn't just suck them all in. The thinking was, if state legislatures chose the senators, those senators would be loyal to the states. Their job was to be guardians of the state's interests. This was supposed to create a calmer, more deliberative Senate, a body that wasn't swayed by what James Madison called the transient impressions of the public, the passing political fads. It was a really elegant theory, but in practice, things got messy, fast. Okay, now let's fast forward to the Gilded Age in the late 1800s. The system didn't just bend, it started to break, and it broke spectacularly. The problems really boil down to two things: just blatant corruption and complete political paralysis. With all the new industrial fortunes being made, a Senate seat basically went up for sale. Think about it. Powerful corporations and tycoons realized it was way easier and cheaper to buy off a few hundred state legislators than it was to win over millions of voters. The Senate quickly got a new nickname: the Millionaires' Club. A place filled with powerful men who answered to big business, not to the people back home. And the amount of money being thrown around was just staggering. Take the 1899 Montana Senate race. You had two rival mining tycoons who reportedly spent over $1 million back then. That's the equivalent of more than $27 million today, not on campaign ads, but just to buy the votes of a few hundred state legislators. And then there was the other huge problem: deadlock. State legislatures would get so tangled up in bitter infighting that they literally couldn't choose a senator. And this wasn't some rare fluke. Look at this timeline. Between 1891 and 1905, it happened at least 14 times. States like Delaware went for years, with absolutely no one representing them in the U.S. Senate. So by the time we hit the 1900s, people were just fed up. The reformers of the progressive era, who were all about making government more transparent and accountable, they had a very clear, very powerful solution: let the people vote directly. And you know what's incredible? How fast this all happened. The push for the 17th Amendment was like a rocket. As you can see here, it flew through Congress in 1912 and was ratified by the states in less than a year. This was not a close call. It was a massively popular idea. The goal was to clean up politics and make the Senate truly democratic. But did it actually work? And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Here we are, over a century later, and that's still at the very heart of the debate. I mean, sure, the amendment absolutely solved the deadlock problem. States don't go without senators anymore. But critics argue it didn't just fail to fix the deeper issues, it might have created brand new ones. Okay, so the modern debate really splits into three big arguments. First, you've got the people who say the amendment just destroyed federalism. Second, there's the view that it was a promise unfulfilled, that the same problems of money and partisanship are as bad as ever. And then there's a third, more subtle argument, that the real goal was simply to untangle state and national politics. Let's break them down. This first one is the core argument for repeal today. The idea is, once you cut that direct link to the state legislators, senators just stopped caring about protecting the states. They didn't have to answer to state governments for their jobs anymore, so why would they fight against federal laws that put new burdens on the states? And proponents of this view say that when you pair that with the 16th Amendment, the federal income tax, which was ratified the exact same year, you basically created a supercharged federal government that could tax everyone directly and ignore the states. All right, onto that second argument, the idea that the amendment was basically a promise unfulfilled. Remember, the whole point was to get big money out of Senate races and cool down the bitter partisanship that was causing all that gridlock. So, did it? Let's see what the data says. Now, this chart is really telling. It tracks how politically polarized the Senate has been since the 1870s. The bigger the gap between those two lines, the more divided the parties are. You can see that big gap back in the Gilded Age. It shrinks for a while, but then look at the far right of the chart. Today, the Senate is arguably more polarized than it was during the exact same era of corrupt deals the amendment was supposed to fix. So on that score, it has definitely not been a long-term cure. And what about opening the Senate up to new kinds of people, to outsiders? Well, this chart shows where new senators came from before the amendment. Look at this. Almost 27% were from the House, nearly 20% were from state legislatures, and 15% were governors. Basically, they were almost all established career politicians. And guess what? That's pretty much the exact same resume you see in the Senate today. The path to power didn't really change. Now for that third argument, which is a little more nuanced. Some historians say the main goal of the amendment wasn't just fighting corruption, it was about fixing state politics. See, before 1913, when you voted for your local state representative, you weren't thinking about local roads or schools. Nope, the election was all about which party's guy they would send to the U.S. Senate. So here's the kicker. State politicians actually wanted the 17th Amendment to get national politics out of their hair. From this angle, repealing the amendment would actually hurt federalism by turning state elections back into proxy wars for D.C. politics. So where does all this leave us? The 17th Amendment was this huge, popular reform designed to fix some very real, very ugly problems. And yet, a century later, a lot of those same problems, big money in politics, special interests, intense polarization, are as bad as they've ever been, if not worse. It raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? Are the problems in our politics about the rules we write, or are they about deeper forces like money and partisanship that will find a way to bend any system we design to their own will?